Coming up on Extraordinary Faith, we'll journey inside the Renaissance of Catholic tradition and introduce you to some of the sacred treasures of Chicago. We'll talk with Bishop Joseph Perry, the Chicago auxiliary bishop who travels far and wide celebrating the Tridentine Mass. We'll meet Mary Kraychy, publisher of a popular hand missalette. And we'll take a ride on a bus tour making its annual visit to the historic churches of America's second city. Stay with us for more on Extraordinary Faith. Hello, I'm Alex Began, and welcome to Extraordinary Faith, a program that examines the resurgence of interest in classic forms of Catholic sacred art, architecture, liturgy, and music. We're coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, home to some of the most architecturally inspiring churches in North America, and also a city that hosts one of the largest numbers of Latin Masses on this continent. We're hitching a ride on a bus tour from my hometown, Detroit, which visits the historic churches of Chicago every year between Christmas and New Year's. We'll be welcomed inside some of the most impressive edifices in the second city, and we'll talk to some of the people who are driving the restoration of Catholic traditions here.
What we do on our tours is we try to bring a complete Catholic experience, so the faithful appreciate not only the beauty of the church, the architectural beauty and the music, that this is all done for a higher purpose, which is the Mass. So we have daily Mass and we have the faithful take part in the Mass. As a matter of putting everything together, I concentrate mostly here in the United States. My tours are, and we have some in Canada, and there's just so many beautiful churches still that we can never, exhaust it. There's just never, the possibilities are endless, really. I think that we have to recapture that sense of the sacred, and the viewing these churches in their splendor certainly, I think, does that, because this is all built towards the highest possible summit, which is the Mass.
For the glory of God and the Catholic Church, and these beautiful Latin Masses that we're able to experience in these beautiful, beautiful historical Catholic churches in Chicago and Wisconsin and Montreal and Quebec City, and they're just so much more meaningful when we have the Latin traditional Mass there.
In my family, we respect tradition. We know that in our Catholic Church, everything is around altar, and what is around altar? Holy sacrifice and traditional liturgy help us not only to enrich spiritually in our Latin Mass, but also in Novus Ordo. Without that, we would feel like orphans.
Maintaining any historic building can be a real challenge. Antique plumbing, heating, and electrical systems require extra TLC. When it comes to historic churches, the task is made even more complex by the artistic factor. Preserving and enhancing the sacred art that decorates these interiors can be a tedious and expensive process, especially if you have to work around peeling paint and roof leaks. Today we're visiting an edifice that has mastered the art of the makeover, St. Mary of the Angels Church. Joining us to give us some background is Father Hilary Mahaney, the parish pastor. Father Hilary, this happens to be the only church in America that your group of priests has taken over. What is the significance of this particular location?
The significance of Chicago is that this was the place where Opus Dei started in 1949. What happened was that the Archdiocese of Chicago was going to close this parish, and that was in roughly 1989, that time. And the Polish people here at that time, there was others as well, but the Polish people started a restoration committee and asked Cardinal Bernardin if they could get enough money if he would keep the church open. And he said yes. If you get $1 million, you can keep the church open. So they did that. They got $1 million.
Where did that come from?
Well, that came from Polish community and different groups that the parishioners that were there at that time just contributed money, and then we were very fortunate to have a donor, a major donor, who helped us with a lot of money, and that it made it possible to do that. And then, after they acquired that money, he said, well, we don't have any priests to put here. And that's where Opus Dei came in, to take over the parish. We now have Mass in 3 languages, Polish, English, and Spanish. Usually we get a pretty good crowd at most of the Masses. A lot of weddings, as you can see by the beauty of the church. We get people from all over the United States really wanting to get married here. So we have to be a little selective because we have to protect the marriage times for our own parishioners.
Father Hilary, thank you for giving us the background on this gorgeous place. One of the common questions that people new to the extraordinary form have is how to participate. To give us some insight is Father Charles White, a priest of the Archdiocese of Detroit and a seasoned celebrant of the traditional Latin Mass. Father White, what was your first experience with the Latin Mass?
I myself am a convert to the Catholic faith, and I was fascinated by liturgy as I came into the church. So I was very interested in all forms of liturgy, and when I discovered the extraordinary form, my first experience was that it was very beautiful, but I didn't understand it at all. I realized that something before me was taking place that was a beautiful act of worship, but I had no idea how to follow it.
And what did you do? How did you become accustomed?
I began to study the extraordinary form to learn more about what was going on. You have to understand that the extraordinary form is not something you can show up to at the first time and follow it completely. And you have to be okay with that. In the extraordinary form, there's more than one thing taking place at the same time. The priest is saying prayers at the altar. Sometimes the servers are doing different things. The choir or the schola is singing, and that can be confusing for people. In the ordinary form, we're used to everything happening, one thing and then the next thing. In the extraordinary form, multiple things can be happening at once. In order to enter into that, then you have to understand what part of the Mass we're in and how to participate in it.
Father White, many of our viewers are new to the extraordinary form. Maybe they haven't even attended one yet, but are curious about it. How would you suggest that a newcomer get oriented to the Mass?
I'd suggest not trying to follow word for word the first time. We can get caught up sometimes flipping through the book, trying to find out what page we're on. My first several Masses I went to in the extraordinary form, I didn't know where we were, but I knew a beautiful act of worship was taking place. It's important to enter into that beauty. Beauty is a path that can lead us to God. When we see the beauty of the extraordinary form, our hearts and our minds are lifted to the Lord. As we learn more about the Mass, then you can get to find where we are in the book, what pages we're on. We can learn things about propers and about the ordinary. But at the very first experiences, I'd encourage people just to sit, to watch, to listen, to try to enter into really praying, really connecting with the Lord during that time.
I think that's an important point, too, that there is so much to know about the liturgy that one never stops learning. And that's not something to dislike, that's something to embrace.
Participation at the extraordinary form often takes an interior act. It's a spiritual participation, oftentimes more than an external participation. We're used to, in the ordinary form, participating with our voices, with our listening to the words that the priest is saying at that moment.
Would it be better for the people in the congregation to try to follow the priest or to follow along with the missals and handouts in their laps?
In my experience, both can be helpful. When you first start attending the extraordinary form, you may want to set the missal aside and just watch and listen and try to pray. As you learn more about the parts of the extraordinary form, as you become more familiar with it, following the book can be very helpful. That way you can see what the priest is praying. You can understand the various parts of the Mass. But even then, sometimes it's helpful to put the missal aside if a word catches your attention and just to pray with that thought.
Some people might say that the priest moves too fast, or maybe the opposite. Maybe things aren't moving quickly enough. How should a person pace his or her following of the Mass?
It's important to really make sure that we are entering into prayer at the Mass. The priest is going at his own pace, and we have to be making sure that we are entering into a spirit of prayer.
We've all had the experience of applauding at the wrong time in a classical concert. What about the music at a high Mass? How does the congregation know when to join in without sounding foolish?
That's another one of those things that has to be learned through time. You get to learn the flow, the rhythm of the Mass by attending it. There are parts that are proper to the people, there are parts that are proper simply to the choir. The choir sings their part, the people are going to sing their part at various Masses, and you have to learn the difference between the two. So I guess I like to encourage newcomers to the extraordinary form not to get lost in the handouts and the Missals, but really to experience the Mass. Allow yourself to be drawn in to the worship of God and the beauty that is the extraordinary form.
It's often said that it's easy to feel at home most anywhere in the world that you attend a Tridentine Mass. The format is virtually the same anywhere you go. Another thing that'll make you feel at home in any English-speaking Latin Mass site is the presence of these ubiquitous red Latin-English missals. These are found in the vast majority of Latin Mass sites all across the English-speaking world. Joining us is the J.K. Rowling of the Latin Mass world, the publisher of these red books and the founder of the Coalition in Support of Ecclesia Dei, Mary Kraychy. Mary, for newcomers to our show, what is the significance of the term Ecclesia Dei?
Ecclesia Dei is named after the document issued by Pope John Paul II. Ecclesia Dei Afflicta is the full Latin title, and it refers to the Church of God afflicted at that time by the breaking away of the Society of Pope Pius X. And out of Ecclesia Dei, the document, grew our little organization, which started in Chicago in 1988, in the fall of 1988. We were told in the summer of 1988, when the document came out, that, oh, now every church will be offering the Latin Mass, the old Mass in Latin, as our dear Father Downey used to refer to it. Well, fall came and nothing happened, so a group of us got together and decided that something ought to be done. Well, after a letter that our fledgling organization sent to the Wanderer, and Al Matt was kind enough to publish it on the first page, and we started getting responses from all over the country. We thought we were just the only little group that was interested. Well, one thing led to another, and at that point there were 6 Sunday Masses in 6 churches. 6 dioceses in the whole United States had the Tridentine Mass on a Sunday basis. But we decided something better needed to be done. So with the help of some friends, we followed the format of Monsignor Andreotti's book and put together the prototype of the red booklet missal. It was first used at a Wanderer Forum in September of 1990, and Father Kenneth Baker said the Mass. So that was one of the first Masses in St. Paul.
How many have you sold?
We've sold over 400,000. That's the red book. Now we've gone into the Latin English booklet for the funeral Mass, the Requiem books, and there is the Latin English wedding book. We have a Latin Spanish version, which is selling very well, and we now have the Latin Spanish booklet for the wedding Mass. So those are probably in the hundreds of thousands too. It's growing. There's a great interest.
Now, part of the reason that they've been successful is you've managed to keep the price so low that a competitor can't really walk in and create another one at anywhere near your price.
Well, that's good to hear. We do give great discounts, quantity discounts for churches and bookstores, but many of our sales are just 1 or 2 books at a time. We had an order in December. A man was going out of town and he hurried to get his order in. He was ordering 10 booklet missals as a Christmas present for his wife. Wanted to make sure they got there in time, which they did, but schools order them. There are some schools that have a one-time Mass, either a high school or a college. Many colleges do have regularly scheduled Tridentine Masses. Some of them are on weekdays, but a few have them on Sundays. And the young people are very interested.
One thing worth commenting on is that your books have tutorials in the margins. They're not just providing the Latin and the English. What motivated you to do that?
Well, again, we thought that it had been so long since there had been any Latin Masses that people had forgotten what to do. And so we went through a lot of old prayer books and old hand missals and found these instructions. And it apparently is successful. I can't help but look over into the next pew when I'm at a Mass and see people using the book, and they'll be following right along and following the instructions.
Speaking of training, you also produce a tutorial tool that people see on almost every altar.
Those are the altar cards. And they are on the altar because they help the priest who's saying the Mass. He doesn't have to read all of the prayers out of the altar missal. The altar card that is on, when you're facing the altar, on the left-hand side, which is the gospel side, that has the complete text in Latin, of course, of the last gospel, which is said at almost every Mass. On the right-hand side are the prayers of that's the epistle side of the altar. Those are the prayers when the priest says the offertory prayers, the lavabo when he washes his fingers, and then in the center card, there are the main prayers of the canon of the Mass. Those are the prayers that never change, and so the priest doesn't have to be going to the missal constantly for those prayers.
What do you think brings the young people to the Mass?
Oh, it's any number of reasons. Some of it, I suppose, is reaction to the going thing. But we hear comments, both written and telephone calls, from some young people who have attended their first Latin Mass, and they pretty much figured out what was going on, or maybe they didn't, and they just thought, this is beautiful, this is a touch of heaven. And there is an increasing involvement on the part of seminarians. More seminaries now are including a course of instruction, so that by the time the young men are ordained, they can go out and say the traditional Mass.
Mary, I'm a great fan of all you've done for the Church. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, and keep us in your prayers.
Over the past 25 years, as the classic forms of the sacred liturgy have grown in popularity, the need has arisen for bishops to celebrate Masses and sacraments in the extraordinary form. One of North America's most supportive bishops in this regard is Chicago Auxiliary Bishop Joseph Perry. Your Excellency, were you first exposed to the traditional rites as a child?
Oh yes, that was the only Mass we had. There was no other. But growing up and through most of seminary, what is today called the extraordinary form was the Mass. So we were well trained in it. And of course in the seminaries, liturgy, worship is done very, very well. So we were formed in the chant and all the traditional hymnody and the Latin Mass as we knew it then.
Why do you believe the old rites are relevant today?
Well, it's a sense of history. The Church is a huge expanse historically. And there are things that develop in time, and there are things that go by with time. Other things are improved. Other things are melded together. And the liturgy being one of the dynamic forces of the Church's life, we have seen that develop over the centuries, over the many centuries. And it's a conversation that continues even on to this day.
How has Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI written and spoken about the two forms of the rite?
Well, as you know, Benedict XVI has a great love for liturgy, and he's written a great deal about it. And he's always been concerned about the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council in terms of the implementation of the reforms of the liturgy and the sacraments and so forth. Some of the unwelcoming elements and some of the joyful and really insightful elements that have come to be known as the Novus Ordo. And when he came out with Summorum Pontificum back in 2007, from the things that I read that he has written and spoken about, I get the impression that he has wanted a conversation between the older forms, what we call the Tridentine, or now the extraordinary form, with the Novus Ordo, or the ordinary form, a conversation to continue between those two forms in order to come up with something that is really appropriate and relevant to the spiritual needs of the church and the people for this time. That is a conversation that will undoubtedly go on, because the conversation has been going on for a couple centuries now about the liturgy and how it can feed the spiritual life of the people of God. And whatever that outcome is, I think probably will be beyond your lifetime and mine. Just like the extraordinary form, which, as we know it, is over 400 some years. And it has fed the life of saints and martyrs. So it's been something precious that we don't want to discard, but it says something about how we meet God today and have conversation with God. Some elements have passed away, others are very relevant, and others will continue to be pieces of the conversation as we move forward, along with the insights that have come to us with Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the current Mass, popularly known by the people in the pews as the vernacular Mass, or the new Mass.
What are some of the ceremonies that you're asked to do in the extraordinary form?
Being a bishop, you're asked or required sometimes to do the high feast days, or whatever, like Christmas, Holy Week, Easter. Confirmation, one of the more frequent sacraments that we impart to young people in their growing adulthood. Sometimes the consecration of churches, altars, those kinds of things.
Could you tell us what's different about confirmation in the extraordinary form versus the ordinary form?
I like to think confirmation in the extraordinary form, or the traditional Latin form, was a little simpler than the one we have now. The older form, of course, was in the Latin language, and there was no Mass connected with confirmation in those days, because you generally did not have the liturgy of the Eucharist or the Mass attached to a sacrament outside of marriage and holy orders. But with the renewal of the sacraments, Mass is oftentimes connected with some of the other sacraments, including the anointing of the sick. Depending upon how many candidates there are for confirmation, time-wise, the confirmation might vary. But the new form, the newer translation, or the revised confirmation rite, engages the people a little bit more for the first reason that it's in the vernacular, and there is an embellishment given kind of the engagement of the bishop with the people as well as the candidates. They can hear those powerful prayers in the confirmation rite in their own language, and of course have the Eucharist attached to it. The older form, being in the Latin, there were some opportunities there with music in terms of chant and polyphony. You could also have benediction afterwards if you wished, or a Mass, but that was usually rare, very rare in those days.
What about a Pontifical Mass per se? How does that differ in the extraordinary form?
Well, the extraordinary form, Pontifical Mass, carries many elements that have featured the Mass for a bishop through the early Middle Ages, and the later Renaissance. So there are more players in the sanctuary, such as an archpriest, you have a deacon, subdeacon, a Mass at the throne for a bishop who is the diocesan ordinary, or at the faldstool, which is a portable chair for a bishop who is not the governor of the diocese, such as myself. There's a little more pomp and circumstance. And of course, with the extraordinary form Mass, the prayers would be a little bit more elaborate. The incantations and the movements of individuals in conversation or in deference to the bishop who's in the sanctuary. Much of that was simplified. Mass with the bishop, much of that was simplified with the revision of the liturgy with the Second Vatican Council. So not quite as much pomp, but a dignified liturgy, no doubt.
You're known for traveling far and wide celebrating these Masses. Could you tell us where some of the places have been that you have done Masses?
Let's see, we've had occasions to be in Poland, had occasions to be with the sisters down at Huntsville, Alabama, Mother Angelica's sisters. We've been in Indianapolis, in Detroit, we've been in Rome.
How do you feel about other bishops starting to embrace these rites?
Well, bishops respond to Summorum Pontificum in a number of ways. They have allowed the Mass in extraordinary form to take place in their dioceses by priests who are so trained to do so. And some of them are courageous enough to learn the rubrics or relearn the rubrics themselves. We see more and more bishops celebrating confirmation, especially with communities that are attached to the traditional form in their dioceses. And more are coming for training here with the canons of St. John Cantius. We have a tutorial for bishops with the Pontifical Mass, as well as with confirmation and other rites for them to learn or relearn.
Thank you, Bishop Perry. If you're interested in seeing a Pontifical Mass or Pontifical ceremony yourself, keep an eye on the schedules of St. John Cantius and the Shrine of Christ the King here in Chicago, where you're bound to run into Bishop Perry before too long. Coming up on Extraordinary Faith in Chicago, Part 2, we'll visit St. Mary of Perpetual Help, where the priests have added traditional practices and liturgies to an existing parish schedule. We'll meet a priest at the Shrine of Christ the King, who faces an extraordinary challenge to restore his church. And we'll visit the historic St. John Cantius, a church founded by Polish immigrants, celebrated for its treasures of sacred art and a rich program of sacred music. You can find out more information about every place we go on our website, extraordinaryfaith.tv. That's where you can also ask questions and participate in our forums. Thanks for traveling with us to Chicago, and join us on our next journey as we explore the beauties of Catholic tradition here on Extraordinary Faith.